Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When rancher Tom Huntley returned from a soil conference to find a mysterious notice nailed to his gate, he thought it was a prank. He was wrong. A ruthless HOA was about to wage war for his land, armed with forged documents, fake authority, and a plan to erase him completely. I came back from the Soil Resilience Conference in Boise a little more optimistic than usual. 4 days among people who still believed land meant something. It had a way of resetting your spirit. I parked my old truck by the fence line and stepped out into the familiar silence of my 340-acre slice of Idaho, my boots sinking softly into the dry spring earth. The air had that smell I loved: sun-warmed soil, cedar, a hint of clover. It was damn near perfect, until I noticed something nailed to my gate. At first, I figured it was just another delivery guy needing directions, maybe a flyer about a county board meeting. But no, this was something else entirely. A crisp white sheet, laminated, like someone thought they were doing me a favor. I ripped it off and read the message 3 times before I said a word. Notice of forfeiture. To the former property holder, per Article 5, Section 3, concerning land utility and beautification, your right to continue operations on the previously designated agricultural zone is hereby revoked. This property is subject to transfer for redevelopment under the guidance of the Briar Hills Homeowners Association. Sincerely, Briar Hills HOA Committee. I just stood there a moment, staring at it, like maybe the sun had cooked my brain. Former property holder? Redevelopment? HOA? This was my land. Had been for 9 years. I bought it from a retiring rancher, paid in full, and filed every scrap of paper with the county myself. There were no liens, no easements, no shared zoning. This was private, sovereign, and unencumbered land. At first I laughed. It had to be a prank. Some bored yuppie in the new development across the valley got creative with a printer and too much rosé. So I shrugged, crumpled the notice, stuffed it in my coat pocket, and went about my afternoon. I checked on the solar pump, refilled the grain bins, and walked the southern fence. The 200 acres I kept wild were coming alive again. Native grasses, pollinators, the occasional mule deer browsing along the willows. It was working. My land was healing. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of diesel engines rumbling where there shouldn't be any. I stepped onto my porch in my flannel and work pants and saw a white Ford dually and a landscaping trailer pulling up by the northern slope. 4 guys in neon vests climbed out. One of them was already unloading a ride-on mower. Another set down a case of turf grass seed. I got down there fast, cutting across the yard, and intercepted them before they reached the fence line. "Can I help you?" I asked, though my tone was closer to "you'd better start talking." "Morning, sir," one of them said, clipboard in hand. "We've got work orders from Briar Hills HOA to begin Phase 1 land conversion. Trailheads, benches, shaded rest areas. Says here, you're the former occupant." I took 1 step closer. "The hell I am." He blinked. "Sorry, sir. This is my land. My name's Tom Huntley. I hold the deed, I pay the taxes, and I sure as hell didn't sign off on any Phase 1. Now, unless you want to be run off this property with a 20 gauge, I suggest you pack up and go explain to whoever signed your check that they've made a serious mistake." He frowned and looked back at his guys. "We were told it was already cleared through the county." "It wasn't," I cut in. "And even if it had been, which it wasn't, you're still trespassing. Turn around. Now." They hesitated, but my hand resting on the buckle of my belt, which just so happened to be next to the grip of my old shotgun, seemed to help clarify the situation. One of them muttered, "Let's just call it in," and they started packing up. I stood there watching, fists clenched, heart pounding. I wasn't angry yet. I was somewhere between confused and insulted, but I could feel the storm coming. There was no way this was just a mistake. Somebody had printed up an official-looking notice, hired a crew, and pointed them at my land like I was already gone. And I knew exactly who that somebody was. From the slope, I could see the new homes over in Briar Hills, gleaming siding, plastic stone facades, perfect squares of lawn like cut-out Monopoly pieces. I'd stayed out of their way since the place was built, never bothered them, never used the shared road, but I remembered the name from that laminated notice: Karen Westmark, president of the HOA. And apparently, in her mind, my farm was already part of her vision board. The notice was bad enough. The landscaping crew, worse. But by Tuesday morning, I realized what I was dealing with wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a campaign. A slow, deliberate attack dressed up as bureaucratic process. I poured myself coffee, stepped onto the porch, and nearly dropped the mug. My mailbox had been filled so tight with envelopes, the door had popped open. Most were glossy, identical mailers with a navy blue HOA logo. The first one I opened said, "Notice of ceased usage rights. Due to prolonged non-productive utilization of adjacent parcels and absence of community-benefiting development, the Briar Hills Homeowners Association hereby moves to place your land into administrative review under the Regional Sustainable Use Directive." I didn't even know what that was, mostly because it didn't exist. It sounded official. Hell, it looked official, but it had no legal weight. I knew that, but the average person reading it, it'd scare the life out of them. Another envelope had a map marked up with highlighters and arrows, proposed park zones, community orchards, event fields. My name wasn't even on it. They had already redrawn the property lines to exclude me. By noon, it wasn't just mail, it was noise. I started getting texts from neighbors, real ranchers, folks I'd traded hay with, lent parts to, asking if I was selling the place, if I'd been evicted, if I was moving to Oregon. One of them forwarded me a post from Facebook. A large section of the valley is finally being returned to public use. After years of waste and neglect, the community is stepping in to restore what's been left barren. Children deserve places to play. Seniors need walking trails. Progress is coming to Briar Hills. It had a photo of my field at sunset. My field. The caption, "Wasted land reclaimed." I gritted my teeth so hard I thought I'd snap a molar. I had kept that field fallow for a reason, restoring soil biology, native grasslands, bird corridors. The same land that some fool just called barren had 5 species of wildflowers not seen here in 30 years. I was still scrolling when I got a knock at the door. It was Eddie McCrae, one of my neighbors to the north, 60 years old, Vietnam vet, not someone easily rattled, but he looked uneasy. "Tom," he said. "You see the paper?" "What paper?" He held up a folded copy of the Canyon Ledger. Front page, bold headline, "Hundreds of acres left to die while families go without parks. Briar Hills HOA proposes green use initiative." My name wasn't in the headline, but the article made it clear. They called me a reclusive absentee landholder, hostile to community progress, and a private interest blocking shared ecological recovery. "Jesus," I muttered. Eddie shook his head. "They're turning folks against you, man. Some of them think you got bought out. Others think you're squatting on public land." I had to yell at a lady in the post office who called you a soil hoarder. I wanted to laugh, but I couldn't. I thanked him, walked back inside, and called the HOA number listed on one of the mailers. A voice answered, calm, clipped, professional. "Briar Hills Homeowners Association. This is Karen speaking." Of course it was. "Karen," I said, "this is Tom Huntley. We need to talk." A pause. Then that tone, smug, polite aggression wrapped in lipstick. "Oh, Mr. Huntley. Yes, we've been expecting to hear from you. You've been trespassing, sending false notices, and spreading lies about my property. That ends now." "Mr. Huntley," she said sweetly, "we're simply trying to bring order to a disorganized situation. You're holding on to land that's zoned for community integration. It's inefficient, wasteful. Honestly, it's selfish. Lady, I'm not part of your HOA. I never signed anything. This land was never included in your master plan. And if you don't retract every last thing you've published, I'll bury you in more legal fire than you can spell. You may not like the optics," she said, now sharpening her voice, "but we're operating with full support of our residents. You'll see what that means soon." I hung up. 5 minutes later, my inbox dinged. A local environmental newsletter had published a profile of Briar Hills Park Initiative with photos of my field, claims of blighted acreage, and quotes from anonymous residents about dangerous isolationist behavior. And so it became clear. Karen wasn't trying to buy my land. She was trying to erase me. Friday morning, I drove down to the Cassia County Recorder's office, a blocky concrete building that smelled like burnt coffee and old printer ink. Not my favorite place on earth, but I needed answers. The stunt with the landscaping crew had been one thing, but now my mailbox was overflowing with what looked like bureaucratic warheads. If someone was trying to pull a fast one, I needed to see exactly what was filed, and when. The woman at the front desk waved me through with a familiar smile, and I was sent to Glenn, the county registrar. Older guy, salt and pepper beard, wore glasses that hung on the tip of his nose like they were trying to escape his face. We'd met before when I filed my irrigation rights. He remembered me. "What brings you in, Tom?" he asked, typing into his terminal with 2 fingers. "Wanted to check on my land file. Something's off." He nodded, clicked a few times, and then paused. A slow frown crept over his face. "Huh. That wasn't the sound I wanted to hear." He turned the monitor toward me. My parcel was there. 340 acres, but it was now split, 2 segments, Parcel A and Parcel B. Parcel B had a notation next to it in bright red. "Pending transfer, voluntary relinquishment submitted, T.J. Huntley." "Hold on," I said. "What the hell is that?" Glenn leaned closer. "Looks like someone filed a voluntary partial release form. It was processed 3 weeks ago." I looked at the scanned PDF, a low-quality scan of a generic form with a shaky signature, supposedly mine, but I never sign as T.J. Huntley, always full name, and the date. I was in Boise that entire week. "Glenn, this is a forged document." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's not your usual signature, that's for sure." The form was submitted through a third-party title service on behalf of the Briar Hills Homeowners Association. "Of course it was," I muttered, "and it's tied to a request for partial rezoning. They're trying to designate Parcel B as community recreational green space." I felt the kind of anger that doesn't boil. It calcifies. I want copies of everything, every form, every signature, every page, and I want to file an official dispute. Glenn nodded and started printing. "You'll also want to talk to the prosecutor. This smells like fraud." I left the recorder's office with a folder under my arm and drove straight to the county courthouse. The assistant district attorney was a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Jane Berg. I'd met her once years ago at a water rights hearing. She had the stare of someone who didn't blink much. I sat across from her and laid out the whole thing. The fake notice on my gate, the landscaping crew, the HOA propaganda, and now this, actual documents filed with the county, claiming I had given away 200 acres. She flipped through the folder. You're saying this isn't your signature?" "I swear under oath it isn't. And I was speaking at a soil resilience panel in Boise the day it was dated." "You have proof of that?" "Receipts, name tag, panel recordings. Take your pick." She nodded. "I'll open an investigation under Section 183204, fraudulent claims to real property. In the meantime, we'll issue a hold on the parcel transfer and notify the court about the forgery." As she spoke, my phone buzzed. It was Rick Corman, my neighbor from the West Ridge. He rarely called. The man preferred radio silence. I stepped outside and picked up. "Tom," he said, "I just got something weird in my mailbox." "Thought you should see it." He drove it over within the hour, a plain manila envelope with no return address. Inside was a printed email thread, looked like screenshots pasted into a Word doc. It was correspondence between several members of the HOA board, and one section was highlighted in neon yellow. "If Huntley won't agree, we'll proceed with the forfeiture narrative. We've already got a form from the Anders property that we can modify. Just tweak the name, redo the signature. Once the recorder logs the rezoning, the rest will fall into place." I stared at the paper so long I forgot to breathe. They hadn't just forged my signature. They had planned it, coldly, casually, like it was a routine step in a marketing campaign. Forfeiture narrative. What the hell was that? A press release euphemism for theft. I drove straight back to Jane's office and slid the envelope across her desk. She read it, didn't say a word for a solid minute. Then she nodded once. "This just upgraded your case to conspiracy and premeditated property fraud. I'll file a formal complaint this afternoon. Expect contact from investigators. And Mr. Huntley, double-check your property lines. If they went this far, they may try more." I walked out of the courthouse and drove home with my knuckles white on the wheel. By the time I pulled onto my gravel road, I had already changed the codes on my gates and scheduled a drone flyover to check for new disturbances. HOA wanted a war? They just started one. I woke up just after sunrise to the low, unfamiliar grind of heavy machinery, not the usual hum of irrigation pumps or the soft putter of my neighbor's tractor. This was sharper, industrial. I grabbed my jacket, slipped on my boots, and headed for the North Ridge, where the fallow acres sloped down toward the river basin. What I found made my stomach turn. They had brought in concrete blocks, 6 of them, each the size of a small car, arranged like teeth across the dirt road that cut through the back third of my land. There was a brand new prefab guard shack set off to the side, some pop-up folding tables under a canopy, and a temporary plastic sign bolted into the ground. It read, "Welcome to Briar Hills Nature Commons access for Briar Hills residents only." I froze. My land. My name still on every damn county file. And here was a literal checkpoint, as if I had crossed into enemy territory. A security guard in a gray uniform stepped out of the shack, sunglasses and earpiece included. He looked like one of those rent-a-cops you find at mall parking lots, but something about his stance made me pause. He had the authority of someone who thought they were invincible. "You lost?" he asked. "Nope," I said. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. This is my property." He stepped forward, chest puffed. "Sir, this section is designated for HOA control under recreational zoning. I'm going to have to ask you to turn around." "You got paperwork for that?" I asked, eyeing the little plastic badge on his vest. It said Private Response Solutions, some dime store security firm hired to play border patrol. "I'm not here to debate land titles," he said. "I'm here to enforce the agreement on file." I narrowed my eyes. "What agreement?" "That's between your HOA and our client." "I don't have an HOA," I snapped. "This land is mine, and unless you want to spend the night explaining trespass charges to the sheriff, I suggest you lower your voice and move your damn roadblock." He pressed his radio button and muttered, "Control, we have a non-compliant subject at Gate 2, requesting authorization for site lockdown." That was enough for me. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in a while, Sheriff Miles Danton. He and I had served on a state ag task force years back. He was the type of man who could gut a steer and cross-examine a felon before lunch. I hadn't needed to call in a favor from Miles in years. But this crossed every line. "Miles," I said when he answered, "I need you on my land. Now." HOA goons just set up a guard post on my northern acreage. "Are you serious?" he asked. "Dead serious. They've blocked the access road with concrete and hired a private security team. One of them just tried to tell me I'm not allowed on my own property." He sighed. "On my way. Stay put. Don't escalate unless you have to." Too late. While I waited, I watched one of the guards start dragging a second sign onto the field. "Future Trailhead, Phase 1. They were already planning construction, probably already handed out brochures and sold the fantasy. In their minds, it was done. I was already erased. When Miles arrived 20 minutes later, lights flashing, 2 deputies in tow, the tension cracked like ice under boots. He stepped out of his cruiser, took one look at the concrete barriers, and let out a long, low whistle. "What the hell is this circus?" he muttered. The security guard straightened up. "Sir, this is an authorized HOA-controlled project zone." "No, son," Miles interrupted. "This is private property. The name on the tax record is Thomas Huntley. And unless you have a court order or a law enforcement escort, you're trespassing." "Sir, we were told—" "I don't give a damn what Karen Westmark told you," Miles said, turning. "Tom, you want to press charges? I want every last piece of this gone. Blocks, booth, signage. And I want that man off my land. Now." Miles looked at his deputy. "Cuff him." "What?" the guard barked. "You can't arrest me. I'm with a licensed agency. You crossed on a land you don't own. You set up a barrier. You denied the legal owner access. That's criminal trespass, partner." As they led the guy away, one of the other guards muttered something under his breath and packed up the shack. Miles looked at me and nodded. "They're getting desperate," he said. "This isn't just a bluff anymore." "Yeah," I replied, "and I'm done playing defense." The next morning, I thought I'd wake up to silence, maybe a breeze cutting through the corn stalks. Instead, my phone was exploding. 7 missed calls, 24 texts, and a subject line from an email that made me sit up in bed. Huntley Land Abandonment, Opportunity, or Eyesore. I tapped the link. It opened a local news article on the Snake River Sentinel website. There, in full glossy layout, was an aerial photo of my property, taken with a drone without my consent, showing the untouched meadowlands I'd deliberately left wild for soil rehabilitation. The headline blared, "300 acres wasted. Residents call for community space amidst fallow fields." Below, it was a quote from none other than Karen Westmark. "Mr. Huntley's property represents a missed opportunity for this valley. It could be a beautiful recreational space, trails, community gardens, even a pond, but instead, it's a weed-choked stretch of abandonment. That land deserves better." I nearly choked on my coffee. No mention of the fact that I'm actively working with the University of Idaho's Regenerative Agriculture program. No mention of my ongoing studies or restoration work. Just buzzwords: blight, neglect, wasted space. Within the hour, I started getting honks from the road. A few cars even pulled over by my gate. One woman rolled down her window and yelled, "Why don't you do something with your land already?" It wasn't just a smear campaign. It was turning public sentiment against me. I called Claire, my contact at the university, and forwarded the article. "They're twisting the entire premise of my project," I said. "This isn't just ignorance. This is weaponized PR." Claire was quiet for a moment. "You're not imagining it. We've seen similar tactics used against conservation easements when development interests are involved. I'll draft a formal statement from the university confirming your work with us and the ecological goals." An hour later, I had a PDF on university letterhead, signed by a professor of sustainable soil science. I forwarded it to the newspaper editor. No response. By late afternoon, it got worse. Rick Corman, the neighbor who tipped me off about the HOA emails, showed up with another envelope. This one wasn't anonymous. It was from the Department of Property Use and Assessment, and it looked very official. Inside was a document titled Notice of Non-Utilization Property Review. It cited a complaint filed by the Briar Hills HOA, alleging that over 60% of my acreage was deliberately left idle in violation of regional land use expectations. They had even submitted photos. Dozens of them, zoomed-in shots of native thistle, wild grasses, a downed tree near the northern slope, all framed to look like abandonment instead of ecological recovery. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered. Rick frowned. "They're trying to make it look like you've forfeited your right to the land." I didn't realize being a good steward of the soil was a criminal offense. That night, my phone buzzed again, this time with a link to a Change.org petition titled, "Reclaim the Valley, Turn the Wasted Acres into a Park." Over 800 signatures in the first 12 hours. Most of the signers were HOA residents. Some weren't even from this county. I scanned the comments. "I jog past that land every day. It's an eyesore. Why should one guy hold back progress for the whole community? He's not even using it. What's the point of owning all that land?" They were manufacturing consent, fabricating a grassroots movement to push their narrative that I didn't deserve my own property. I spent the evening drafting a rebuttal, a public letter with photos, data, legal boundaries, even a side-by-side comparison of my land and overdeveloped plots in neighboring counties. I sent it to every news outlet in the region and posted it to a few local forums. The next morning, a single headline showed me the tide wasn't quite ready to turn. "Landowner claps back at HOA, but concerns remain over wasted acres." They didn't care about facts. They cared about optics. And Karen Westmark was playing them like a fiddle. By now, I'd stopped leaving the front gate open. I padlocked it at night, lined the perimeter with private property signs, and installed 2 motion cameras, one facing the gravel lane, the other pointed directly at the old irrigation barn, where I kept my archival maps and original deed papers. Something told me I was going to need them soon. I didn't have to wait long. 3 days after the fake non-utilization notice, I came back from the feed store to find a white pickup truck backed halfway into my driveway. 4 men in reflective vests were unloading equipment. Weed whackers, poles, rolled plastic fencing. One even had a handheld GPS unit. I rolled down my window. "You boys looking for someone?" One of them, maybe in his 40s, stepped forward with a clipboard. "You Mr. Huntley?" "I am." "We've been contracted by the Briar Hills Recreational Board to begin site prep for a community access trail. Got approval right here." He flipped the clipboard around. It was a laminated sheet, not a legal document, and bore no seal or county insignia. "Tell me, do you always show up on private land without confirming the owner?" He hesitated. "HOA said this section was under joint recreational initiative." I smiled coldly and pointed to the old boundary marker beside my fence. "That marker's been there since the 40s. This is Huntley property, all 340 acres of it." The man scratched the back of his neck. "Look, we're just subcontractors. We don't want any trouble." "Then load up and turn around. Fast." They didn't argue. 10 minutes later, the truck was gone. But the warning bell had rung loud and clear. This wasn't just legal harassment or bad press anymore. They were ready to act like it was already theirs. I drove straight to the county registrar's office, this time not to ask questions, but to pull records. I wanted copies of every single document referencing my land for the past 90 days. Took over an hour, but the clerk finally handed me a folder thick enough to kill a squirrel. That's when I saw it. A voluntary property use adjustment request, filed under my name. It stated that I had relinquished control of 200 acres to a land stewardship trust for the public benefit of adjacent communities. It had a signature, my signature, except it wasn't mine. It looked like someone had copied a signature from an old registration form and pasted it onto a new file. But it was crooked. The edges didn't line up with the rest of the ink. A closer look under the office lamp showed slight pixelation. It was a scan, a poorly made forgery. My blood boiled. I called the registrar over. Who submitted this? She squinted. Looks like it was couriered in. No digital trail. No in-person delivery record either. Isn't that a red flag? She nodded slowly. It'll be flagged now. I snapped high-res photos of every page, took the copies, and drove straight to the sheriff's office. Miles wasn't at his desk, but Deputy Rivas was. I laid the papers out like a prosecutor at trial. Forgery, I said. Attempted land fraud. And I'll bet my damn boots this came from Karen's people. Rivas leaned over the documents, whistled, and said, "You mind if we make our own copies? Take as many as you want. I'm also contacting the DA. This isn't just harassment anymore. This is felony-grade tampering." As I walked out, Rivas called after me. "Tom, be careful. When people start faking signatures, they stop playing by the rules." I didn't answer. I was already dialing a friend of mine, a forensic document examiner based out of Boise. That night, while coyotes howled in the distance, I scanned every piece of paper I had on this property. Every map, title transfer, tax record, witness affidavit from the previous owner's estate. I uploaded the scans to a secure folder and sent the link to my contact. If they wanted to forge a battle, I was going to bury them in real documents. The day after I submitted the forged document to the sheriff's office, I took my morning coffee and walked the fence line, a habit I'd picked up ever since things started spiraling. The dew was thick across the pasture, and the sky hadn't quite shaken off the last of dawn's haze. But as I crested the ridge that marked the far northwest corner of my land, I stopped dead. There they were, concrete barriers, 3 of them. The kind you see at highway construction zones, 2 feet thick, stacked in a crooked line right through my upper field. Behind them stood a prefab security booth, complete with tinted windows and a little rooftop solar panel. The cherry on top, a wooden sign bolted to a metal pole freshly painted in HOA green. Public trailhead, access for Briar Hills residents only, unauthorized entry prohibited. My mouth went dry. They hadn't even tried to hide it. This wasn't stealth. This was a flag in the ground, a declaration that they believed they already owned this land. I climbed back on my ATV and rolled straight down to the blockade. As I pulled up, the booth door creaked open. A uniformed man, not county, not police, stepped out holding what looked like a radio. "Sir, this is a private security checkpoint," he said flatly. "Please return to the designated side of the trail." I blinked at him. "You're on my property." The man reached for the radio. "We have a non-compliant subject at Trailhead Bravo. Requesting response." "Trailhead Bravo," I repeated. "You name my ridge like it's a military op?" "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to vacate the area. HOA policy does not permit." That's when I hit the gas. My ATV roared up and stopped 10 feet from the booth. I stood tall, leaned over the handlebar, and pulled my phone from my coat pocket. "You're trespassing, you're armed, and you're obstructing a landowner on his own property." I hit speed dial. Miles answered on the second ring. "Sheriff," I said, "they've escalated. You need to come out here, now." He must have heard the tone in my voice because he didn't ask a single question. On my way. 25 minutes later, a county cruiser kicked up dust across the lower pasture. Miles stepped out, took one look at the booth and the barriers, and swore under his breath. "Hell," he muttered. "They really did it." "They're using private security," I said. "Tried to detain me. Gave me some kind of coded call sign." Miles walked up to the booth. The security guy stiffened. "This land belonged to the Briar Hills HOA?" the sheriff asked. "No, sir," the man replied, eyes twitching. "Do you have paperwork authorizing you to be here?" "We were instructed by HOA Compliance Chief Westmark that this section was undergoing recreational transition." "That's not what I asked." He hesitated. Miles turned back to me. "Get your title and boundary maps." I jogged to the barn and returned with the laminated plat overlays, the same ones I'd had verified by the assessor's office just last year. Miles unfolded them on his cruiser's hood, compared the GPS coordinates, then glanced back at the booth. "You." He pointed at the guard. "Step aside." He pulled the guy's ID, radioed dispatch, and 5 minutes later, the man was in the back of the cruiser. Unlawful presence on private property, Miles said. I'll file the preliminary report today. But Tom, this is bad. They're acting like they already own it. That means they're preparing for something bigger. I've got the forgery. I've got the survey records. You just cuffed their rent-a-cop. I'm taking this to the DA, Nick. Miles nodded. You should, and file for a no trespass order while you're at it. It won't stop them, but it'll give me more leverage when this blows. That night, I didn't sleep. I filed the no trespass paperwork, drafted the full complaint with evidence of the forged deed, and scheduled a meeting with the district attorney's office in Boise. I wasn't fighting a nuisance anymore. This was a land war. And I wasn't losing an acre. The Boise County Courthouse had never looked so imposing. Tall granite columns, red brick wings, and a flag whipping in the wind over a cluster of news vans parked out front. I hadn't asked for media coverage, but I figured Karen's people had tipped off a few outlets to spin the story. That was fine. Let them watch what real exposure looks like. The courtroom was packed. First 2 rows were homeowners from Briar Hills, dressed like they were heading to a golf mixer. Behind them, a few local ranchers I recognized. At least 3 reporters, 2 with press badges, 1 I suspected was from that HOA-friendly blog that kept quoting anonymous compliance sources. Karen arrived in a tailored beige suit, flanked by 2 attorneys and a woman I recognized from a previous town hall, the HOA secretary. She avoided my eyes as she took her seat at the plaintiff's table. I was the defendant on paper, but everyone in that room knew who'd actually been wronged. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Richter, looked like she had 0 patience for HOA games. Once proceedings began, my attorney, a tough former federal land use litigator named Brooks Keller, took the floor. He started with the forgery. He held up both versions of the voluntary property use adjustment request, the original and the doctored copy. Then he brought up the forensic analyst who walked the court through metadata inconsistencies, mismatched digital timestamps, and the absence of any original notarization. This document, she said, holding it up like poison, is a fabricated submission containing a forged signature, misused file headers, and was printed on a copier owned by Briar Hills HOA. Serial number confirmed by toner residue patterns. Karen's lead attorney tried to object, but the judge cut him off. Then we dropped the satellite imagery. Time-lapse photos from the University of Idaho's Soil Restoration Initiative showing how the untouched 2/3 of my farm had steadily regained native grassland and biodiversity. I even submitted an affidavit from a USDA wildlife coordinator confirming that my field supported migratory birds and native pollinators. Then came the real gut punch. Brooks called a surprise witness, Dan Eldridge, former member of the HOA's Internal Compliance Board. He walked in like he was walking to the gallows. I hadn't seen his name on any lists. I didn't even know he'd flipped. Mr. Eldridge, Brooks asked, can you tell the court what you witnessed in the meetings regarding the Huntley property? Dan cleared his throat. President Westmark told us the land was being wasted and that we should reallocate it for public use. When one of us objected that it was outside our jurisdiction, she said, and I quote, then we'll make it our jurisdiction. She threatened to expel anyone who dissented. Did she mention submitting forged documents? She said we'd get it done through administrative proxies and that no one would care if we bypassed some forms as long as the land was put to better use. The room went silent. Karen was pale, stone still. Her knuckles clenched so tight her hands trembled. The judge recessed for deliberation. When we returned an hour later, the ruling came fast. This court finds that the Briar Hills Homeowners Association, under the direction of Karen Westmark, engaged in deliberate document falsification, unauthorized attempts at land seizure, and coercion of internal board members. Furthermore, it finds that Mr. Thomas Huntley is the sole legal owner of the disputed land and is entitled to damages. She looked up. Due to the egregious nature of these actions, this case will be referred to the district attorney's office for felony prosecution. Karen didn't even flinch when the bailiff stepped toward her. Maybe she knew it was coming. Maybe she thought she'd get bail. She didn't. Fraud, conspiracy to commit land theft, obstruction, and impersonation of public authority. 14 years. No parole. And that was just the start. The HOA was ordered to pay me $3.8 million. covering the damage to my land, legal costs, security threats, lost crop revenue, and punitive fines. The judge also issued an injunction dissolving the HOA's claim to the recreation trust they'd tried to use to seize the land. Outside, the reporters swarmed, but I just gave one sentence. They forgot this is Idaho. You don't take a man's land out here. You get buried under it. 2 weeks after the verdict, I stood at the county foreclosure auction with my hands in my coat pockets, watching the final gasps of Briar Hills unfold under the hot Idaho sun. A fold-out table served as the registration point, and a small wooden podium handled the speaker. The crowd was smaller than expected. Word had gotten out. The Briar Hills HOA was bankrupt, disgraced, and under federal review. No one with half a brain wanted to buy anything tainted by that mess, except me. On the docket was Lot 3, the so-called Community Operations Hub, which had been their little HOA headquarters, a 2-story prefab glass-paneled structure with a meeting hall, a reception office, and, fittingly, a strategic planning suite. Upstairs, the same place Karen had used to coordinate her attempts to gut my farm. Starting bid was $28,000. I raised my hand at $35,000. Someone in the back, a suit, probably from a recovery firm, tried $36,000. I raised to $40,000. He looked at me, blinked, then slowly put his paddle down. Whether he realized who I was or just sensed something radioactive in the air, I didn't care. Sold, the auctioneer barked. I signed the papers right there on a folding table, took the deed, and walked away the proud new owner of the former brain of the monster that tried to take me down. I didn't wait long. The next morning, my contractor showed up with a crew and 2 dumpsters. We tore out the HOA code compliance plaques, pulled the surveillance wiring, and stripped the paint down to its bare cedar siding. I repainted it red, barn red, and installed a hand-carved sign over the door, the Huntley Agricultural Education Center. Inside, I built out display rooms, one for regenerative soil samples, another for wildlife cameras and native seed catalogs. Local school kids started visiting on Fridays for field workshops. Even some ranchers showed up, curious about those lazy fields I never farmed. But the best part? The old security booth they installed, the one they used to block my land with. I had it forklifted to the far corner of my field and bolted it to a raised platform. Then I installed a viewing deck and nailed a new sign to it. Exhibit A, How Not to Steal a Farm. It got more laughs than I expected, especially from the rancher next door who brought his grandkids every week just to hear the story again. Funny thing, the HOA itself officially ceased to exist 5 days after I bought the building. Turns out, their board couldn't survive without its queen bee, and with the lawsuits piling up and most members resigning, the state gave them 30 days to dissolve. Their charter was revoked. The website went offline. The green banners came down. In its place, a cooperative gardening circle formed by 3 younger residents, mostly people who'd voted against Karen's decisions but never had the guts to speak up. They reached out timidly to apologize. I told them to come by the center and see what actual land stewardship looks like. They did. One of them now volunteers weekly teaching kids how to build compost. I didn't forgive easily, but I figured if they were willing to get their hands dirty for real this time, I could give them a shot. After all, there was plenty of dirt to go around. Late September brought with it that golden haze that blankets the Idaho foothills when the grasses wave like wheat and the sky feels like it belongs to no one. I woke just after sunrise, same as always, poured black coffee into the same tin cup I'd used since I moved here, and walked out past the edge of the old barn to check the new saplings near the east fence line. They were strong, rooting well. The land liked being left alone, so did I. News of Karen's sentence had gone national. Apparently, there weren't many cases where an HOA president got hit with 14 years for land theft and forgery. One of the segments on a cable network had used drone footage of my fields, with a dramatic voiceover about rural resistance. I didn't care for the fame, but I did appreciate that people were finally seeing what had happened, not just to me, but to the idea that someone in a blazer with a clipboard could dictate what land was wasted. It was a Tuesday when I got the letter, handwritten, carefully, in blue ink. It was from Karen's husband, or more accurately, ex-husband. He wrote to say he'd filed for divorce the month after the trial, that she'd threatened to take the family down with her, and he'd had enough. He apologized, not for her, but for not realizing sooner what she'd become. Said their son had been bullied at school, and they'd moved 2 states over to get a fresh start. The last line stuck with me. Whatever she tried to destroy, I hope you rebuild it better. I folded the letter, tucked it into my desk, and went out to feed the chickens. That evening, I held a gathering at the center, our first official community night. Families came, many of them former HOA residents. Some still hesitant, others just relieved the nightmare was over. We had chili, cornbread, a fire pit going. I gave a short talk on the history of the land, then opened it up for questions. One kid asked if the fields would ever be turned into a park. I smiled. "This whole place is a park," I said. "You just have to look a little closer." Later that night, alone in the red-painted building that used to plan my downfall, I switched off the lights and walked out to the viewing deck where the old guard booth now stood. The wind had picked up. Cool, clean. The stars were out. I leaned against the railing, looked out over the moonlit field, that wild, untamed land they said I wasn't using. It was quiet, whole, and mine. Still mine. Forever.